My mother died on a Thursday morning in April, holding my hand with the spring sunlight coming through the hospital window and the sound of birds outside that felt completely wrong for the moment. She had been sick for 8 months. We knew it was coming. We had said everything that needed to be said, or so I believed, right up until the moment she pulled my hand close and told me something that rearranged every memory I had of my childhood, my family, and the man I had called my father for 43 years. She told me the truth about him, all of it. She said she had carried it for decades because she did not want to destroy our family, and she had made peace with that choice. But she could not go without making sure someone knew. She could not let him walk away from everything he had done with no one ever holding him to account. She looked at me and said, "I am trusting you with this because you are strong enough to do something about it, and I never was." And then she told me, "Welcome to Grandma Payback Stories. I am so glad you are here. Today I am telling you about a woman named Vivian, her daughter Rachel, and the man they had both trusted completely, who turned out to be neither of the things he appeared." Before we go further, please subscribe and hit that notification bell. I bring you these stories every week, and this community is the most rewarding thing I do. Alright, let us talk about what Vivian told Rachel in that hospital room. Vivian had been diagnosed with stage 3 ovarian cancer 8 months before her death. She was 68 years old, a retired music teacher, gentle and precise and quietly funny in the way of people who have spent their lives around children and learned patience from necessity. She had been married to Rachel's father, Gordon, for 44 years. Gordon was 71, recently retired from a long career in financial planning, well regarded professionally, known in their community as a generous and responsible man. Rachel was 43. She had a career in healthcare administration, a husband she loved, 2 teenage children, and a relationship with her parents that she had always considered one of the stable, reliable pillars of her life. She visited them monthly. She called twice a week. She thought she knew them completely. She did not know them completely. She had never known her father at all. What Vivian told Rachel came out slowly, between shallow breaths, in a hospital room that smelled of antiseptic and flowers. She told it the way someone tells a story they have practiced silently for years, in order, with detail, with the particular, exhausted clarity of someone who has decided there is nothing left to protect. When Rachel was 7 years old, Vivian had been diagnosed with breast cancer for the first time. She had gone through surgery and chemotherapy and radiation. It had taken 18 months and left her physically changed and emotionally raw. She had survived, but the survival had cost her. While she was undergoing treatment, Gordon had met a woman through work. Her name was Diane. She was younger, in her early 30s, unattached. Gordon had begun an affair with her approximately 4 months into Vivian's cancer treatment. He had told himself. He later explained to Vivian when she found out that he could not handle the fear, that he needed an escape, that it was not about Vivian but about his own terror of losing her. Vivian had found out when Rachel was 9. She had found letters. She had confronted him. He had cried and begged and promised it was over. She had stayed because she had a sick child herself that year. Rachel had been dealing with pneumonia and missing school, and because she genuinely did not know how to leave, and because she believed, truly believed, that he meant what he said. He had seemed so remorseful. He had been so attentive after she had decided to give the marriage another chance and had told no one. The affair had not ended. It had simply gone underground. Gordon had continued seeing Diane for 11 more years. During that time he had also, Vivian now told Rachel with a steadiness that was almost frightening, been quietly redirecting money from their shared accounts. Not large amounts at once, slow, careful, plausible amounts. He told Vivian it was going into investments. He told her the portfolio was performing poorly during the difficult years. He controlled all the finances entirely, something Vivian had been grateful for throughout their marriage because she found numbers stressful and trusted him. Absolutely. When Vivian was 60 and Rachel was long grown and gone, Vivian had finally, at the encouragement of a friend, hired her own accountant to look at their retirement picture. The accountant had found the discrepancies within 2 weeks. Gordon had moved approximately $340,000 out of their marital assets over a period of 15 years. He had opened accounts in his name alone, in a bank across town. He had used their shared money to fund an entirely separate financial life. When Vivian confronted him the second time, she was 60 years old and her husband was 67, and she was tired in a way that had no bottom. He admitted everything, the money, Diane, all of it, and then he told her that Diane had actually ended things years ago, that the money was just poorly managed. Investments he was ashamed of, that he had been trying to rebuild it quietly. Vivian did not believe a word of it, but she was 60 and she was tired. And Rachel was settled and happy, and Vivian could not bring herself to explode her daughter's world. So she said nothing. She had been saying nothing for 20 years. 8 more years felt survivable. Then she got sick again. And lying in that hospital bed, she decided that survivable was no longer the standard she was willing to hold herself to. Rachel sat in the chair beside her mother's bed for a very long time after Vivian finished talking. Her mother's breathing was labored and slow. The monitors beeped their steady rhythm. Outside, the birds continued their entirely inappropriate cheerfulness. Rachel asked one question: "Where is the proof?" Vivian smiled, just slightly. She said she had been waiting 40 years to be asked that. She directed Rachel to a metal box in the back of her closet at home, behind her winter coats, which Gordon had never once touched in 44 years of marriage because Vivian handled her own clothes and her own closet, and that was the one space in the house that had always been entirely hers. Inside the box were documents Vivian had collected and photocopied quietly over 8 years. Bank statements, the original, letters she had found when Rachel was 9, a notebook in Vivian's handwriting documenting dates, amounts, account numbers, and conversations, everything. Vivian passed away 4 days later. Rachel attended the funeral standing beside Gordon, shaking the hands of people who praised him, watching him cry with what looked like genuine grief, and thinking, "I know who you are now." She collected the box the following week when Gordon was at a golf game. She took it to a financial attorney first, then to a forensic accountant, then to a family law attorney. She spent 3 weeks in consultation before she did anything visible. She did not want to move too early. She wanted to move once, correctly and completely. Gordon had already begun talking about the estate. He spoke to Rachel about their finances with the authority of a man who expected no questions, who had always been trusted with this domain and saw no reason that should change now. He was planning to consolidate accounts, simplify the portfolio, make things easier to manage for one person. He used that language, for one person, as though Vivian's absence was primarily an administrative inconvenience. Rachel let him talk. She asked questions that sounded interested and naive. She took mental notes. He told her about accounts she already knew existed from her mother's documentation, and about accounts she had not known about, which her attorney was very glad to hear described. She came home from those conversations and wrote down everything immediately. When she had everything she needed, she made the call her attorneys had been waiting for her to make. Gordon's retirement party had been scheduled for 2 months after Vivian's death. He had postponed it once out of what appeared to be respect for the mourning period, then rescheduled it for early June. His colleagues, his friends, his neighbors, the people who had known him for decades as a responsible and admirable man, were all going to gather and celebrate his 40 years in financial planning. Rachel attended. She helped her aunts arrange the flowers. She spoke warmly to Gordon's colleagues. She helped with the catering. She was, by every visible measure, a loving and dutiful daughter doing her best to celebrate her father while still grieving her mother. 40 minutes into the party, when the room was full and the speeches were about to begin, Rachel stood up. She said she wanted to say a few words about her father before the formal toasts. People quieted and smiled. Speeches from daughters at retirement parties are expected to be warm and a little funny and briefly tearful. People were ready for that. What she delivered was something else entirely. She spoke for 8 minutes. She told the room about her mother's first cancer diagnosis and her father's affair during her treatment. She told them about the money, $340,000, redirected from the marital estate over 15 years. She told them about her mother's decision to stay silent to protect her family and the toll that silence had taken. She told them that her mother had spent the last hours of her life finally telling the truth, and that she intended to honor that. She then looked directly at Gordon and said that the documents were already with the attorneys, that the financial investigation was already underway, and that his retirement, which he had been so looking forward to, was going to be considerably more complicated than he had planned. Gordon stood up. He was very red. He said her name sharply. She looked at him and said, "This is what accountability looks like." And then she picked up her bag and walked out of the party. The room was completely silent. The legal process was genuinely complicated, because much of what Gordon had done existed in a grey area between poor financial management and deliberate fraud. The forensic accountant's work was crucial. She was able to demonstrate that the account transfers were systematic and intentional rather than poor investment decisions, which changed the legal character of what Gordon had done from unfortunate to actionable. The estate dispute ran for 14 months. Gordon's attorney argued strenuously that the money had been invested and lost, that there was no intent to defraud, that Vivian had been aware of the investment strategy. The documentary evidence Vivian had collected over 8 years made that argument very difficult to sustain. Her handwritten notebook alone, with its dates and amounts and account numbers, was extraordinarily damaging because it demonstrated that Vivian had known about specific transfers and had documented them contemporaneously, which was not what someone who had approved the investment strategy would do. The settlement ultimately required Gordon to liquidate assets and return approximately $260,000 to the estate, which then passed to Rachel as the sole heir under the will. Vivian had quietly updated 6 months before her death with her own attorney, one Gordon had never met and did not know about. Gordon retained enough to live on, but not the comfortable retirement he had been anticipating. The professional consequences were quieter but lasting. Several of his longtime colleagues had been at that retirement party. Word traveled the way word does in professional communities. To clients who had been with him for decades moved their accounts. A former colleague who sat on the board of his professional association quietly initiated a review of whether his conduct with his own marital finances raised questions about his professional standards. The review found nothing actionable in his professional work, but the scrutiny was noticed and the conclusions about his character were drawn privately by everyone involved. Gordon moved to a smaller apartment. He spent a year barely speaking to Rachel, then gradually began, calling cautiously, circling towards something that might have been either reconciliation or simply the loneliness of old age requiring some kind of connection. Rachel answered the calls. She was not warm, but she was not cruel. She had done what she came to do, and she did not need to be cruel to feel complete about it. She kept her mother's box, the metal one from behind the winter coats. She put it in her own closet, with a note inside in her own handwriting explaining what it contained and why it mattered. Not because she thought anyone would need it again, but because it felt right to give her mother's careful documentation a resting place that acknowledged what it had cost her to create it. Vivian had spent 40 years protecting people from the truth. She spent her last 4 days making sure the truth survived. That is not a small thing. That is, in fact, everything. If you are still here after that one, you are my kind of people. Hit that like button and subscribe to Grandma. Payback Stories for more stories of real courage and real justice. Leave me a comment below and tell me, what moved you most? Was it Vivian's patience? Rachel's speech at that party? Tell me, I read every single word you write, and I will see you in the next one.